Hey, welcome back. So think about this for a second. We live in a world where you can be sitting in one state, buy something from a company in another, and have it shipped from a totally different third state. But what happens when things go wrong? Whose laws even apply? Well, today we're diving into the really fascinating legal field that sorts out this exact kind of mess. Conflict of laws. Okay, so let's put you right in the middle of it. Imagine you live in California. You buy a product online from a company that's based in Arizona. The warehouse it ships from is in Nevada. And when it gets to you, it's broken, and worse, it actually injures you. Now, this isn't just some dusty old law school question, right? This is a real, modern-day problem. You've got one single incident that stretches across 3 states. Where do you even begin? Well, the answer is in this area of law called conflict of laws. And really, it just boils down to 3 big questions. First, there's jurisdiction. Which court even has the power to hear the case in the first place? Second is choice of law. Okay, so whose rulebook are we going to play by? And third, enforcement of judgments. How do you make a win in one state actually count in another? And these 3 things, they're the pillars we're going to break down today. All right, so let's tackle that first one, jurisdiction. Before anyone can even start arguing about who was right or wrong, we have to figure out which court gets to be the referee. And it all comes down to one simple thing, power.
It all kicks off with something called judicial jurisdiction. You can think of this as the court's basic ticket to the game. Before a judge can say a single word about the case, they have to have power over the people involved and the topic of the fight. Without that power, anything they decide is completely meaningless. It is the absolute first, most fundamental question.
Okay, so jurisdiction isn't just one thing. It actually splits into 2 different types. On one hand, you have personal jurisdiction, which is the court's power over the actual people or companies, so in our case, that Arizona company. On the other hand, there's subject matter jurisdiction, which is about whether the court can handle this type of case. For today, we're going to zoom in on the one that gets really interesting and tricky, personal jurisdiction.
So this is the big question, right? How can a California court get any power over a company that's all the way in Arizona? The answer comes from a huge Supreme Court case that gave us this really important idea called the minimum contacts test. And the core idea behind it is just fairness. It's that simple. It wouldn't be fair to drag a company into a court in Alaska if they've only ever done business in Florida. They need to have some kind of connection there first.
And how do courts figure this out? Well, they have this really straightforward 3-step checklist. Step 1, was there purposeful contact? Did that Arizona company choose to do business in California? Like selling things to people there? Yep. Step 2, did the lawsuit happen because of that contact? Yes, the injury was from the thing they sold you. And finally, step 3, is it fair? Is it fair to make them show up in a California court? Well, since they chose to make money there, the answer is pretty much always going to be yes.
So let's plug our story into that test. And yeah, the answer is a slam dunk. By selling its product online to someone they knew was in California, the Arizona company purposefully reached into the California market, and that's all it takes to create minimum contacts. So round 1 is over. A California court definitely has the power to hear this case.
Okay, great. So we figured out where we can sue. But that just opens up a whole new can of worms. Whose rules does that California court use? Do they just automatically use California's rulebook? Or do they have to look at Arizona's laws? Or maybe even Nevada's? This, my friends, is the choice of law puzzle.
The way courts handle this has changed a lot over time. The old school way was this super rigid rule with a fancy Latin name, Lex Loci Delicti, which just means the law of the place of the wrong. It was predictable, but sometimes the results felt kind of random. Under that old rule, we might end up using Nevada law, just because that's where the box was shipped from. But now, most states have switched to a much smarter, more flexible system. They look for the state with the most significant relationship to the whole situation.
Yeah, they call this an interest analysis for a reason. The court is literally weighing the interests of each state. So let's think about it. Nevada, its interest is pretty small. It was just a stop along the way. Arizona, sure, it wants to look out for its companies. But California has a really strong interest in making sure its own citizens are protected from dangerous products. When you put all those on a scale, California's interest just weighs more. So yeah, the court is almost definitely going to use California law.
Okay, quick recap. You sued in California? Check. The court had jurisdiction? Check. They used California law? Check. And you won. Awesome. The court says the company owes you a bunch of money. But wait, there's one final massive problem. The company and all its money are sitting back in Arizona. How in the world do you actually collect? And this is where the U.S. Constitution itself swoops in to save the day. I love this part. There's this little thing in Article 4 called the Full Faith and Credit Clause. And let me tell you, it's not a suggestion, it's a command. It basically tells all the states, hey, you have to respect each other's final decisions, period. And what this means for you in our story is huge. It means you can literally take that piece of paper from the California court, your judgment, walk it over to Arizona, and an Arizona court has to enforce it like it was its own. No do-overs. No second guessing. A win in California becomes a win everywhere. This little clause is basically the constitutional glue that holds the entire country's legal system together. So, are there any ways for Arizona to get out of this? Well, technically, yes, but the loopholes are tiny. We're talking super rare. Basically, they'd have to prove the California court never had power to begin with, which we already know it did. Or they'd have to prove there was some crazy fraud that prevented them from even defending themselves. But for pretty much every normal case, that full faith and credit rule is ironclad. All right, so we've covered the big three: jurisdiction, choice of law, and enforcement. And I know, this can all sound like super abstract, lawyerly stuff, but I promise you, these ideas are popping up all around you, every single day, in ways you probably don't even realize.
You know that cruise ticket you bought or that concert ticket? Ever actually read the tiny print on the back? Yeah, me neither. But buried in there is almost certainly something called a forum selection clause. This is a company using these exact rules to its advantage. They can put right in the contract that it doesn't matter if you live in Seattle and the cruise was in Alaska. If you want to sue them, you have to do it in a court in Florida. And the Supreme Court has said, that's okay. It's a massive deal. And the stakes here can get insanely high. There's this wild, true story about the heir to the Campbell's soup fortune. This guy had mansions in both Pennsylvania and New Jersey. When he died, both states claimed he was a resident because they both wanted a huge chunk of his estate in taxes. And get this, the courts in both states agreed with their own state. His estate had to pay millions in taxes twice. It just goes to show you, something as seemingly simple as where your legal home is can be a multi-million-dollar question.
But here's the one that affects every single one of us, probably multiple times a day. You know when you download a new app and you just scroll to the bottom and click I agree? Well, you've just signed a contract. And in that contract, you have almost definitely agreed to two things: exactly where you have to sue that company, and exactly which state's laws will apply if you do. You are literally making decisions about conflict of laws with every single click. And all of this really points to this huge tension in our world today, right? We live and shop and work in a global, borderless world, but our legal system is still carved up by these old state lines, which leaves us with a really big question to think about. As technology makes geography less and less important, are those borders on the map starting to become legally meaningless? It's definitely something to chew on. Thanks for watching.